One of my favorite things to do, especially if I'm struggling with my writing or having a hard time coming up with ideas, is just to pick up an amazing novel and read the beginning of it. And I like to think that this is helpful because I'm studying great works and what other masters have done. Part of it may just be a distraction, a way of procrastinating and avoiding actually doing my own work. But today I want to read a little bit from Game of Thrones, Chapter 1, Book 1, the very beginning. Because it's a fascinating question, I think, if you look at this massive series that now everybody knows about. They made the hit TV show. Huge, 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 as big as it can get for a fantasy series. I think it's a fascinating question. How do you start something like that? You look where it is now, how famous it is, where all the characters got to. It's fun to think, well, where did it all start? What was the first book like? What was the first chapter like, even, that hooked people and brought people into this universe back when nobody knew what this universe was and they weren't committed to it more than they would be committed to any other book. Don't worry if you're not a huge fan of Game of Thrones, or if you're just sick and tired of hearing people talk about Game of Thrones. I'm not going to get into theories about Game of Thrones right now. I just want to look at the first 3 scenes and how the story starts and talk about some writing tips and things that I've picked up, things that I really appreciate, that I feel like I've learned from George R.R. Martin. So the way the series starts, well, first of all, there's a prologue where there's riders beyond the wall and they see some White Walkers. It's, the foreboding sense of danger. That's what the prologue is. But then the first chapter, it's really genius. It's really, Jon Snow is the badass. He's obviously the hero of the chapter, but the chapter is told through Bran's eyes. So the very first chapter, we see everything from Bran's perspective. And Ned Stark beheads a prisoner, deserter of the Night's Watch, and Bran is a young kid and he watches and he's trying to be brave. But the real crux, the real meat of the scene comes when they're riding back to the castle and they find the direwolves. So Robb and Jon ride ahead and they find the dead direwolf and the direwolf babies, cubs. There's an argument whether or not they're allowed to keep the cubs, and finally Ned relents and Robb and Jon convince him to let the kids take the wolves. So here's what happens at the very end. It was not until they were mounted and on their way that Bran allowed himself to taste the sweet air of victory. By then his pup was snuggled inside his leathers, warm against him, safe for the long ride home. Bran was wondering what to name him. Halfway across the bridge, Jon pulled up suddenly. "What is it, Jon?" their Lord Father asked. "Can't you hear it?" Bran could hear the wind in the trees, the clatter of their hooves and the ironwood planks, the whimpering of this hungry pup, but Jon was listening to something else. "There," Jon said. He swung his horse around and galloped back across the bridge. They watched him dismount where the direwolf lay dead in the snow, watched him kneel. A moment later he was riding back to them, smiling. "He must have crawled away from the others," Jon said. "Or been driven away," their father said, looking at the 6th pup. His fur was white, where the rest of the litter was gray. His eyes were as red as the blood of the ragged man who had died that morning. Bran thought it curious that this pup alone would have opened his eyes while the others were still blind. An albino, Theon Greyjoy said with wry amusement. "This one will die even faster than the others." Jon Snow gave his father's ward a long, chilling look. "I think not, Greyjoy," he said. "This one belongs to me." There's so many things to love about this first scene. I love the slam by Jon there. Just puts Theon in his place. Theon's kind of a cocky, pompous idiot. And Jon just has that it factor. He's obviously going to be our hero. Bran looks up to him because even though he's a bastard, Jon did the selfless and honorable thing by first of all offering all of the direwolves to his brothers and sisters because he's a bastard. But then he found this one last one, the sixth one, the white one. And so we have this awesome foreshadowing that Jon is going to be special, and then somehow his eyes are open in a way that his brothers and sisters are not. And that's the way that this amazing series starts. We start with the Starks in the north, and we have this amazing foreshadowing event where this dire wolf, this mythical creature that hasn't been seen in years and years and years, they find one, and there's 6 pups, and one goes to each of the children. So it's this really fun device that the author uses to sort of reflect and show us the personality of each child, because in this first story, the Starks are our heroes. They're the ones that we see first. They're the ones we know the best. They're the ones that we root for. And I would say there's two big things that I really appreciate, 2 big things I've learned from reading this series. And the first one is about how to write an amazing scene, just a succinct and to the point and hard-hitting and emotionally powerful scene. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the other thing that I love about Martin's world is his characters and how he defines them so well. And this is just a perfect example of how much emphasis he puts on that from the very beginning, because you have the 6 kids and they all get their wolf. And so then they have to name their wolf. So you get to know a little bit about that kid. And immediately when you meet Arya or Sansa or Bran, you get to know exactly what these characters like, what they love, what they want to be, what they don't want to be. And one of the things that's so brutal and amazing about the Game of Thrones universe is that George R.R. Martin has this terrible and awesome way of not giving his characters what they want. So it's really obvious what they want. It's really obvious what they desire most. And most often they never get that. And usually what happens is they get the complete opposite of what they really want. I think the best example of this is Sansa, because when we meet her, she's a young girl who just wants to live that princess life. She wants to wear pretty dresses. She literally wants to meet her knight in shining armor. She wants to go to fairs. She can't wait to go south and meet all the knights and people of the court and sit up high at the dinner table and be a princess. That's what she wants. And so we get to see her just get put through hell. So she marries the boy terror. Basically, she gets all the worst husbands you could ever imagine. So what does she want? She wants a knight in shining armor. What does she get? She gets monsters. And not just, she gets one after another. Monster, 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 monster. And through that, we get to see what Sansa is made of, and it changes her, and that's her arc. But she's probably the best example I can think of right off the top of my head. What's another one? I'll just go with Jon Snow. He's obviously the hero, or going to be a hero of this series. Like I said, he's featured in that first chapter, and in Bran's eyes, he's the most noble brother, even though he's the bastard. So the thing about Jon is that he's the most like his father. So he's, in a lot of ways, the most fit to be a king or fit to be a ruler. But because he's a bastard, he'll never be able to achieve that status. So that's another good example of, we know what Jon wants. He wants to be able to have the position like his brother Robb, and to be able to have the dignity and honor of being a Stark, but he'll just never get that. And so what happens to Jon is he gets sent off to the Night's Watch, which is where you disavow your family and throw off your house colors and get a new identity. And so it's this amazing dynamic where we get to see him sort of rise to prominence in a different realm, in a different theater, with different sets of rules in the north and kind of become that ruler that we always knew he was made to be. I mean, you just go down the line, and once you recognize this pattern, it's so amazing to see it. So Bran, what is Bran? If you watch the TV series, you have this weird vision of Bran now as this awkward teenager, but in the beginning, he's this boy who just loves climbing. He's climbing all around the towers. He's climbing on the trees. And so right there, you can already guess it. What's going to happen to him? Well, he's going to have a traumatic accident. He's going to be crippled, and now he can't climb anymore. Arya, same thing. She wants to be a fighter. She likes fighting. She's a tomboy. She wants to train with her sword, but she's a princess. So she's not allowed to do those things. Those things are frowned on. And Arya is another great example of someone who has these really strong desires, but because of the situation that they're in life, they just keep getting put through hell because all of Arya's peers are trying to turn her into a princess, and she just resists it at every turn. And then when Arya gets out of that realm and gets cast off into the world, which is the maturation process, the coming of age character, then we get to see her come into her own and become this sort of cold-blooded killer and go to the other extreme, which we always guessed that she might have that in her, but was always suppressed when she was trying to be made into a princess. After that first chapter where we find the dire wolves, then the next one is we have a short scene where Catelyn tells Ned that Robert Baratheon is coming north, and that really kicks off the whole story that the king is marching north. And then immediately after that, the third chapter that we have is with Daenerys. So we jump right to the other side of the world, and we see this young, scared, timid, silver-haired girl. Is it silver hair? Blonde-haired? Yeah, silver, white-haired girl. And she's on the other side of the world with her brother, and they've fled from the rebellion, and they're sort of outcast royalty on the other side of the world. And we meet Daenerys for the first time, and she has this really nasty older brother who's telling her what to do and ordering her around, and he's telling her to be brave, and I think he pinches her nipple and tells her to remember, or don't make me angry. And so immediately we're like, all right, when's this guy gonna die? We just can't wait. You just hope he's gonna meet his horrible end at some point as soon as you see that shit. But what I love, the reason I bring up this scene with Daenerys is because I mentioned that I love how Martin writes his scenes, how just short and sweet and powerful they can be. And the way that this scene goes is that we meet Daenerys, and she's just this scared girl, and she wants to go home, but she doesn't really have a home, and she's about to be introduced to the Khal Drogo for the first time, and he represents the other. He's this mythical creature. He's really like a wild beast in her eyes. He's this huge, scary dude with hair down to his ass, which represents all of the battles that he's won and never lost. And not only is she going to have to meet this guy, but she's going to have to marry him and sleep with him. So it's got to be one of the scariest or worst things that you could ever imagine as a young girl, I would think. And so we meet her in this time, and what happens, the way the scene ends, is that Khal Drogo is walking towards her, and Daenerys, her prick of a brother, is whispering in her ear. Here, I'll just read the last few sentences. Dany turned and saw that it was true. Magister Illyrio, all smiles and bows, was escorting Khal Drogo over to where they stood. She brushed away unfallen tears with the back of her hand. "Smile," Viserys whispered nervously, his hand falling to the hilt of his sword, "and stand up straight. Let him see that you have breasts. Gods know you have little enough as it is." Daenerys smiled and stood up straight. So the reason I think this scene is so powerful and so amazing is just where it ends. I think that if you're a novice writer or you don't know what you're doing, you tend to try to make the gun go off too much or have the big fight. I talked about this a little bit in the last episode, I believe, where my editor read my manuscript, and I had this scene in the beginning of my story where the main character's brother got shot, and it was right near the beginning of the story. And what I was trying to do was, do something powerful and emotional and something gripping. But what my editor pointed out to me was that it was just too much too soon, or that you have to build up to these moments to really earn them. And I think that's got to be a really common novice mistake. And so maybe if you're a first-time writer and you're imagining this young princess girl, like in this Daenerys scene, then you would be tempted to end this chapter where, maybe Khal Drogo walks all the way up to her and he meets her. Maybe he grabs her by the wrist. Maybe he takes her back to his tent and then the tent flap closes. Or maybe he hits her, like... You'd be tempted, I think, as a new writer to show more action or show the worst thing happening. But what's so amazing about this scene, the way it ends, that last sentence where it says, Daenerys smiled and rolled her shoulders back and stood up straight. The reason that's so fucking awesome is because it's emotionally significant, because it's her choice to be brave in this horrible situation that she's confronted with. So it's really, another coming of age moment where we have this young girl, this teenager who's facing, Khal Drogo sort of represents the world, the scary world out there. Once you've left home, you have to face the monsters out there in the world. And she has this moment where she wants to run. She wants to go home, which we all do whenever things get tough. There's a part of us that wants to turn and run, and so this scene is, I think, so great because it ends on that powerful note where it's not anybody else. It's not Khal Drogo doing some crazy action or even her brother. It's her. It's her choice in the face of this horrible thing that's about to happen. She stands up and she owns up to the moment, and she smiles even though she feels like crying and running away. She is brave in the face of this danger. And then when you think about where her character goes and what she grows into and everything that happens, it's just amazing and brilliant to think about her character arc. And that's what I love, going back and looking at what the great writers do, and especially in the beginning of their stories. It's a fun exercise to think, if you're going to write Daenerys, if you're going to write the Dragon Queen, what's the first scene? What's the first way that you're going to see her? And maybe you'd be tempted to write her on the dragon, or hatching her baby dragons from the very beginning. But it's so much more powerful when you start her off as this sort of cowering, scared young teenager, and that's how you meet her. And then it's so much more rewarding to see her grow out of that and grow into the ruler that she eventually becomes. There's this pretty common idea in fiction writing, which is that you have to put your characters through hell in order to find out what they're made of. And that's obviously something that George R. Martin does a really good job of. And there's also that idea that there's no story without conflict. And so nobody wants to read a story about a queen who's just happily ruling her kingdom and nothing ever goes wrong. We want to see, in fiction, we want to see our characters suffer, and we want to see them go through divorces and injuries and breakups and bankruptcy and fights and disasters and all this stuff, because then we get to see them react and we get to see them step up. And it never happens with the hero of the story that they just run from their challenge. Or they might have a period of time where it's called, in the Joseph Campbell hero myth, it's called, it's something like the refusal to answer the call. Because every hero has some sort of call to adventure that pulls them out of the ordinary world and into this adventure and into the new frightening and exciting world. And so you could think of somebody like Bilbo Baggins, who is just living his happy life in the Shire, and then all of a sudden Gandalf comes and brings all these dwarves, and they're going off on an adventure, and they want to bring Bilbo with him. And of course, at the beginning, Bilbo is reluctant, and he doesn't want to go, and he fights it with everything he has. He doesn't think he's right to go on this journey. It's appalling. He doesn't want to hang out with these weird dwarves. And that's his refusal to answer the call or to step up and be a hero. And that's natural to do in the beginning. But eventually, as the story goes on, and even when he sets off on the adventure, he still doesn't want to be there. But eventually, he steps up and becomes a hero over the course of the story. For some reason, the other example that just popped into my head was The Matrix, where Neo is just he's like a computer scientist or a hacker. I don't know. He's a tech guy who works at a computer all day, and he starts to get these crazy email or these crazy messages, like these data codes showing up on his computer. And what it is people inside the Matrix who are contacting him. And at first he just doesn't believe it. It's too weird. It's too strange. He doesn't believe it's true. And so he tries to avoid it. And that's the refusal to answer the call. And then at some point, the hero has to step up and answer the call to adventure. And in the Matrix, you have that badass, memorable scene where Neo takes I don't remember if it's the red pill or the blue pill, but Morpheus gives them the choice of which pill to take, and that's obviously the symbolic moment where Neo passes the threshold and he chooses. It's not something, it's much more powerful, and the right way to do it is that the hero should choose to accept the adventure. Otherwise, they're not in control and they're sort of a passive character, and that's not good. So these are the kind of things that I think about when I go back and read these stories from the greats. And my reading has definitely changed since I started writing more these last few years, because I still read these novels and really enjoy them. It's just fun to go back and read something like Game of Thrones or The Lord of the Rings. Another one that I reread was Hugh Howey's Wool series when I was trying to start my novel. I talked about Hugh Howey in the first episode. And I read differently these days because it's fun to read and figure out how the author did certain things and appreciate what they did. And right now I'm in the process of starting a new story. And so I've been reading bits of other stories to get inspiration. I've been reading a lot of mostly urban fantasy. I read Neil Gaiman's American Gods, and then I read the first book of the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. and then I read Patricia Briggs' The Moon Called, which is a werewolf story, which I really did not like. A lot of urban fantasy that I've read I don't really like. Maybe I'll do an episode on that or talk more about that at another time. But right now, I want to get a little more personal. Uh, one of the reasons that I have been thinking about this idea that as a writer, you need to put your characters through hell to find out what they're made of is, I guess, because I'm kind of down right now and going through a shitty situation myself. If you follow me on Instagram or follow April or listen to our other podcasts, then you've seen pictures or heard about how I blew my knee out. So right now I'm sitting with my leg propped up on a stool and my leg is fully braced and it's just sticking straight out stupidly. And it's really messing with my mind today because I just I haven't been able to exercise. So I'm somebody who I really like to just sweat either in the morning as at some point during the day. I think it goes a long way towards your physical health. But for me, it's such a mental thing too, just to clear my head, whether that's playing sports or running or stretching or whatever it is. And so that's been really hard the last couple of days, especially with the timing of dealing with the reality of this injury that I have and the fact that I'm going to be on crutches for God knows how long and that I'm going to have to get surgery and maybe miss work. I don't know, all this stuff. I'm not going to go into all of it right now, but it's kind of a double negative to have that tough situation and then not to be able to exercise on top of it, because that's how I process. That's like when I'm going through a tough time, I like going for a walk or going for a run, and that really helps me get my thoughts together and feel better and I always feel more optimistic after I work out. Every time, like, it's without fail. It's not magic. It happens every time. I always just feel better after I work out, no matter what's going on. And so that's been a bummer not to be able to do that these last couple of days. And I like to think of my life. I've talked to my friends. I've talked to my dad about this. I like this idea that your life is a story, or that your life is the story that you tell yourself about your life. So you may be right or you may be wrong, but everybody has a story that they tell themselves about what they're doing and who they are and why they're here on the planet. And I think that's important because I think at a basic level, humans respond to narrative, and narrative is really powerful for us. And ever since the reason I bring this stuff up is because ever since I kind of made this proclamation that I was going to be a writer, that became part of my story that I tell to myself about my life. And so when I'm going through these struggles, or when things are hard, or when I can't, last episode I told the story of how I had to scrap that first novel that I wrote, and that was a really difficult time. And as I went through that, I was telling myself, all right, this is part of the process. This is part of the journey. All writers go through this. You have to write bad novels to get through to the good ones. And I'm constantly looking at my life through that telescope. And so I've been thinking about this idea that you got to put your characters through hell to see what they're made of. And I've been dealing with my own tough situation this weekend because I just went to the hospital today as I record this and got the MRI. And I was hopeful that maybe my knee was going to be okay. I could rehab it on my own. And the doctor literally told me, you tore everything. So my knee is totally fucked and I need surgery and the whole works. And the thing about real life is that we never want to be in these kind of situations. And that's what you do as a fiction writer, is you put your characters through these situations, and much worse than just physical injuries. because you want to see them respond and see how they get out of those tough situations. And there's also this idea that in the hero arc, in any good character arc, that the character is going to ultimately get what they need and not necessarily what they want in the beginning. So just to go back to that Lord of the Rings reference, what Bilbo Baggins wants in the beginning of the story is just to stay home and not go on any adventures and live his peaceful life. But maybe what he needs is a good adventure to shake himself out of his pattern and to gain some pride and to see other parts of the world and then come back home and appreciate it even more. But he doesn't want that. And so I've been, as I've had this knee injury over the weekend, I've been thinking, okay, obviously this is the last thing that I want to happen right now, but maybe it's what I need. I hope so. I hope that I need it in some way, and I hope that it helps me in some way, because it's certainly not what I want, and so I don't want it to just be this shitty situation that has no rhyme or reason, which I suppose there are things like that in life. But one of the only silver linings that I can see in this, or one of the things that I keep telling myself, and this goes back to that idea of seeing your life, framing your life as a story, is now I'm just thinking, okay, well, now I have more time to write because I'm going to be sitting down a lot, and I'm going to be at my desk a lot, and I'm not going to be able to do these other things that take up more of my time, like even little things, just like running errands or going shopping, not to mention doing jiu-jitsu and basketball in the evenings and on the weekends. I'm going to be home more. I'm going to be at my computer more. And so maybe that's, that would be a wonderful thing if I could look back on this injury and say, oh, that helped me, it helped kick my ass into gear with my writing. Because if it doesn't accomplish that, then it's just good for nothing and just sort of reasonless suffering, and that's not what anybody wants. And so I was thinking, the other funny and pressing thing that's happening is I've been telling this failure story on the podcast, and so this is episode 3. This is a failure story part 3. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to catch up that failure story, and I'm going to bring it all the way to the present moment. And so I'm going to come up to the current date with this failure story. And then the question becomes, okay, what do you do now? So I think that the next episode, I will get into depth about the writing projects that I'm currently working on, talk about what I'm actually writing now, what my plans are going forward. And I've been able to sort of stall that for a little while I've been thinking about the past and going back through my records and recording these 3 episodes about what I've been through. But I don't know, maybe it's serendipitous. It's certainly interesting, this timing where this failure story that I've been telling on the podcast is quickly approaching the current moment, where it's going to force me to talk about my writing that I'm working on at the moment and do what I hope this podcast will do, which is keep me accountable to you guys and everyone who listens and comments and interacts with me over this. Keeps me accountable to everyone so that I'm writing and producing. And so it's funny timing that this injury would happen now, because I really need to get back into a better writing habit. And I've just been busy lately with all these sports I've been doing, and then also the 2 podcasts that I started, this one and then the other one with April, has taken up a lot of time too. But the whole goal and my two biggest goals in starting this podcast were, one, to help other people who are struggling with writing or any sort of creative pursuit or difficult challenge that they're working on in their life. And then for me personally was to keep myself accountable as I work on my writing and share what I'm doing and share the process. So last time I left off with the Turtle Island story, and an excerpt from that story is on my website, www.jacksontandy.com. So you can see that if you want to check it out, see what I was writing back then. So what did I do after that? I was living in Australia at the time. I made the tough decision to scrap that novel, and that coincided with my contract with my editor ending, and I talked about all that last time. So I don't know what I did immediately after that. I felt bad. I took a couple days off of writing. It was hard to tell my wife about it. I talked to a couple of friends about it, and they're in a weird spot because they want to say, no, don't give up. You can do it. Keep going. They want to be encouraging. But it's also delicate, and it was a hard decision. So I was pretty bummed out about that for a while, and eventually I got back in the writing chair and started my new project. And so based on my failures and the things I had learned from the Turtle Island novel, what I told myself with this new story is I was going to try to make it as simple as possible, and I was going to try to just write a short story with only a few main characters or one main character, and just start at the beginning with a simple scene and a simple premise, and take it all the way to the end. And this second novel that I wrote, eventually I ended up calling it Jamie Rhae Daemon Hunter. And it was a fantasy story, sort of a epic fantasy, but not with castles and knights. It was more these people living on a secluded island, and more sort of magical, natural wonders. Like I still had the swimming with the turtles, and then there were alternate dimensions and demons and monsters and stepping through portals and cutting through worlds into these other environments all over the island. And for each environment, there were different demons who ruled that environment. And then I had these sort of 4 young kids who I told the story about. And the main character was a young boy. His name was Jamie Rhae. And the thing that I did successfully with this story, and the reason I was able to finish it, which with the Turtle Island novel, which was so sprawling and huge that I never was able to finish it, the reason I was able to finish this Demon Hunter story was because I did a very important and powerful thing, which I had never done before, which was I knew exactly how the story was going to end. And that may sound stupid or simple or obvious to you guys, but all writers are different, and some people know what the ending's going to be, and some people like the creative pursuit of starting with a strong premise and seeing where it leads. But with my first story, Turtle Island, I never knew exactly where it was going to end, and what would you expect would happen? I never made it to that ending, which I never knew what it was going to be. And with this Demon Hunter story, in my plotting and outlining and ideas, I was able to come up with an ending. And so then I was able to say, all right, here's where it ends. I'm going to start it here and then just race to the finish, because my whole goal was I just wanted to write the novel. I didn't want to get mired in this big, 3 novel long series and all these different worlds and cultures and all these things. I just wanted to go fast, light and fast. That was my objective. And I learned a little bit about my writing process I learn, you learn more each time. And that's a big part of becoming a professional writer, is just learning how you work, learning what you're good at and not good at, and how to capitalize on what you're good at, and how to race through or get help with the things that you're not good at. And one thing that was interesting that I had never done before was the way I started this novel was I wrote 3 or 4 beginnings. Because when I outline and when I'm just plotting, and I'm actually going through this right now with my new story, I tend to just get lost. There's just so many possibilities. There's so many options when you don't know exactly what your story is. So you can go down literally numberless amount of rabbit holes when you're plotting, and never, stick to one path. And it's really, death by too many options. And so what I did with this Demon Hunter story was I would actually just sit down and start writing, and sort of forget about the outline, and I would write a scene with a character. And I think I did this 3 times, where I'd write like 5,000 to 10,000 words. I'd write like the first 3 scenes, and I think, oh, this is pretty good. And then a couple of days would go by, and I'd have a different idea, or what I thought was a better idea. So I think I wrote 3 or 4 beginnings. And then I got to that 4th beginning, and I thought, oh, this is it. This matches up with the ending that I had sort of imagined. So this is this is why it's hard when you're new writers, because you don't know what your process is, and you've never done it before. So you're sort of building a house, but without a blueprint. You just have all the raw materials, and you're sort of hammering shit together, and maybe it doesn't add up to anything. And I'm still not sure exactly what it means, but I think I figured a little bit of my process out, where I can actually, one way to help me not get lost in all the outlining, but to be more concrete, is to actually sit down and write the beginning of the story. And maybe that won't be the beginning that I end up using, but it'll help me visualize the story. And then at least I have something that's finished that I can say, okay, I don't like that, I'd rather do this. Because for me, the first drafting is really the part that I don't like. I actually like editing, and I actually like reworking the writing that I've already done. I can do that forever and ever and ever. But what's hard for me is the first drafting. I don't like, that's much harder for me to write new words than it is for me to take what I've already written and craft it and sculpt it and move the paragraphs around and make it better. That's what I love doing. So I think by forcing myself to write a few different beginnings, I got some of those jitters out of the way, and then I was able to look at them objectively. And with this ending I had in mind, I was able to say, oh, this one matches. Like, okay, this is the one I'm going with. And from there, I just raced to the finish. And I wrote this story. I think it was only about 40,000 words. When I finished it, I was content to let it be whatever it was going to be. A short story, a novella. If it ended up being a series, I didn't know. But what I did, so my method obviously had its strengths and weaknesses, but what I ended up doing in my first draft is I just had bare bones, and it wasn't a very good story because the supporting characters weren't very good, and I just had this main character sort of rushing through adventure after adventure until the end. And so in subsequent drafts, what I did was I actually went back and added a lot more scenes and a lot more chapters that, more fully fleshed out the story. But the reason I bring that up is because I think what was so good for me, or what helped me, was I was able to race through to the end and write. By the time I had my last finished product, my last finished draft of this novel, it ended up being pretty much a full-size novel. It was about 70,000 words. But by racing through it like I did in the beginning, I was at least able to finish it. And as a new writer, a struggling writer, that was, the biggest hurdle that I hadn't been able to overcome in my last novel, Turtle Island. And so with the Jamie Rhae Daemon Hunter story, while I didn't write a great novel in that first draft, it was more of a skeleton. It was like a hard plot line without the necessary characters and events supporting it. But I did finish it, and then I had a story, and then I had something to work with. So even though it wasn't maybe the best method, and it requires a lot of reworking and editing and second and third and fourth, and I must have done 5 or 6 drafts, probably more than that. I'd have to go back and look, but even though it was inefficient, it helped me get over the hurdle of not being able to finish a story. So then after that, I was able to spend a few months fleshing it out and making the story better and seeing what the obvious holes in the plot were, and trying to take the things I had learned from my editor from my previous novel and apply those to this novel and make it into a fully formed story. And I really did. It took me from the fall of 2017 is when I first started writing those new beginnings, and maybe that winter I found the beginning that I really liked, and then it was anywhere from 8 months to 12 months to write this novel and have it pretty much finished to the point where I was ready to hire an editor. So I guess I'll just go ahead and fast forward to that point. So in the fall of 2018, so not too long ago, I had this story finished, and I did something kind of new and fun and exciting for me, which was I joined this website called Scribophile. And Scribophile is a online community of writers, and you can do a little bit for free, but eventually you have to get a subscription. It's like $8 a month or something, not too bad. But what you can do is you read other people's chapters of their stories, and you review them, and you kind of get to work as an editor, and you can give your feedback, whether you're commenting on grammar and punctuation. Sometimes people tell you what they want. Sometimes you can do whatever you want. But basically, you read other people's stories, you give them feedback, which is good for any writer to go through that process of seeing other beginner writers and noticing mistakes and helping people. It was really good for me, and this was the first time I'd ever done that. And when you review other people's work, then you get points and you build up credits so that you can put your own work on the website and have people react to it. So that's what I did. I had this Jamie Rhae Daemon Hunter story, which by all accounts was as good as I could make it myself. That's how I felt. That when I say it's finished, that's what I mean. The novel was finished in the sense that I thought that I couldn't make it any better myself. So that's the point when you should get an editor. And what I first did was went to this Scribophile community, and that was really exciting. I remember doing that last, I think it was August and September. I was doing that. I was posting my chapters one by one, and people were commenting. And right away, it's really telling because, I got some praise, and that made me feel really good. People say, "Oh, that hooked me," or "Oh, I love those characters." And then people ask questions, and right away, there are a couple questions that popped up, and some themes that people brought up multiple times, where I started to realize, okay, these are the biggest problems of my story. So these are the things that I can work on. My new stories that I'm writing, I plan to do that as well. because it was so good to get all that feedback. And one of the biggest problems and ruts that I get stuck in as a writer is just working in a cave all the time, what feels like working in a cave, where like I kind of just glossed over this story where I wrote this novel, Jamie Rhae Daemon Hunter, and really that took a year of my life, and the novel before that took over a year of my life. And so it's easy to gloss over that in hindsight, but when you're working on it, it's just morning after morning after morning. You're struggling through it. You're getting up earlier than you wanted to, or staying up later than you wanted to, and working on it. And some days you are inspired, but most days it's just kind of a grind. And the hardest part about it is that you don't have much to share with anybody, and you're not getting any feedback, and it's a very lonely pursuit, this writer thing. And so that's why Scribophile was so great. When I finally had what I felt like was a finished product, or as good as I could get it, it was just such a rush of sort of happiness and excitement to start putting my chapters online and having people comment on them. And I went through this whole process where, well, before I get into that, let me just say that's something that also ties into why I'm doing this podcast with my current novel, my current stories that I'm working on. One thing that I hope this podcast will do is help me combat that feeling of working in a cave and being alone, and that sort of writing in a cave feeling that's so difficult day after day, because I'm going to use the podcast to talk about what I'm working on. And I feel like with the internet and Instagram and podcasting, I feel like we have to maybe have moved past this old model by now, where an author works really hard for 2 years and then puts out this perfect product where everybody can read it and interact with it. Not that that's definitely not dead. That's always going to happen. But I feel like there's room for different kinds of models and more interactive ways for authors to write and interact with their readers, which I've seen, which is what's so awesome about the self-publishing community, is they're trying new stuff and doing things in different ways. And so what I want to do with my new series is write short stories and get them out to people fast so people can react to them. And one of my favorite self-publishing authors, a guy who's really inspirational, is Michael Anderle, who started the 20 books to 50K group, which is this awesome Facebook group that's grown into these big indie conferences they do around the country. I won't get into all of it right now, but one of the really amazing concepts that I heard from Michael Anderle in the beginning when he was making his rise, which was that instead of spending years and years working on this big trilogy and then you release it to the world and then maybe it just flops, well, that's maybe not the best business strategy. He came from a software development background, and his mentality was more from the tech world, where you should be putting out sort of tests all the time. So what he recommended was writing 3 very short stories and giving them to people and just having people figure out what they like or not, and having people react and give it a rating, and then find out what people like and then focus on that. Then go all in on that story and beef it up into a series or whatever you like. But the point is, what he's doing there is getting reader feedback earlier in the process and incorporating that into the writing process much earlier than waiting until you have a finished product, which maybe, may or may not be any good or something that people want to read. That's something that I want to do, and something that I hope this podcast will help me do. But to put a bow on this Jamie Rhae Daemon Hunter story, which you could say was my second real novel. So I had the NaNoWriMo novel, which wasn't really a novel, but it was 50,000 words that I wrote. Then I had the Turtle Island novel, which I talked about in episode 2. And now I'm talking about the Jamie Rhae Daemon Hunter novel. So you could say those are 3 novels that I've written. And the way this third one ended was I got that feedback from the Scribophile reviewers, and it didn't take very long before I realized, okay, here's a couple things that I would need to change to make this a better story, or a wholesome story. Really, the reviewers did a good job of finding those things out. Not that there was any one person who nailed it, but it was sort of just the aggregate of people giving me feedback. The things that were mentioned the most sort of rose to the surface, and I realized, which ones were the important ones. So what I did after that was I went through this big process where I queried editors. So I was about ready to start in on a whole new relationship with a new editor and start the whole process of developmental editing all over again with this story. And I sent out samples. The way it usually works is you send a sample of your writing, and then the editor will mark up that bit of writing, and they'll also get a feel for how good of a writer you are, and they'll give you a quote. And I did that with a few different editing companies that I just found online. I just emailed a bunch of people and called some people, and some people responded, and some were better fits, and some were, the pricing was more expensive or cheaper with certain ones. And throughout all of that, I don't know what happened. It was really hard. It was really hard again. Just like with the Turtle Island novel. Now it's easy to look back and summarize it, but in the moment it was really hard to decide whether to go forward on that, because it's expensive to hire a good editor, and you can spend anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s for a developmental editor based on the quality or the reputation of your editor, and it's a commitment. And I don't know, maybe it was just fear, but I don't think it was just fear. I've been through the editing process before. I wasn't afraid of that. I just didn't think that I didn't like the story that I had. And it wasn't just that I was tired of it because I had worked on it for so long. I just really felt in my heart that objectively this novel isn't good enough for what I want to publish as my first novel. And maybe that's my problem. Maybe that's my issue, is that I want it to be perfect, and I can never make something that's good enough, and I'll never publish ever. That's the fear, that's the worry. But I still hold to it. I believe that I knew I could do better, and I knew that this novel had been a good learning experience, and I just didn't feel like it was worth it to go through the whole. I did feel the difference between this Daemon Hunter story and the Turtle Island story is this story had a beginning, had a middle, had an end, and I knew it had flaws, but I knew if I hired a developmental editor and we worked through it, I knew that I could get it to the point where it was good enough. I knew that I could make a story out of it, and it would probably be publishable. By that I mean it would probably be readable, but I just didn't. Good enough wasn't good enough, or good enough wasn't exciting. And for better or worse, I made the same decision, which is that that story was going to be a good learning process for me, and that I was going to move on to the next one. So as I'm saying these things, I'm imagining listening to myself, and I'm sure there are people who will say, well, what the fuck, man? What the hell were you thinking? And I don't know what to say to that. All I can say is that I've had enough. I've had enough of writing but not publishing. I've had enough of novels that get put in the drawer and never see the light of day. And I need to break out of this. There's so many things. I've been working for this for so long, and I'm ready. I need my friends know and my family members know that I need to get over this hump. And that's a big reason why I started the podcast. And it's do or die now, man. It's time. It's time to make it happen. No more excuses. I've got this bum knee. I'm going to be sitting at my computer a lot. I've told my whole failure story from the beginning all the way up to the present. And now it's on me to try and turn this failure story around and to try to start being a more prolific writer and to get things out to people at a better rate and to finish that first novel and get it out there, even if it's not perfect. Episode number 4, I'm going to talk to you all about the Tomorrow City idea that I have. The new stories, the new characters. I'll get into detail about it, and I'll talk about my plans, and then I will move forward from there, and we'll write a new chapter in this story. Thank you as always for listening. If you've been through anything like this, please Instagram me or email me at jacksonmarktandy@gmail.com, and let's talk about it, because, man, we got to get through this shit together. It's time to shut up and do it. And with that, everyone, have a beautiful week. Have a happy Wednesday. I'll be back next week with more.